Commander Jake Morrison's blood pooled black in the moonlight. His hand trembled as he pressed against the shrapnel wound in his abdomen, feeling warm intestinal fluid seep between his fingers. Around him, the Kaur Valley echoed with gunfire, the distinctive crack of AK-47s mixing with the thunderous response of M4 carbines. His SEALs were fighting their way out, and he was the reason they were dying. Reaper, we're coming back for you. Lieutenant Marcus Chen's voice crackled to Morrison's radio, distorted by static and desperation. Morrison coughed, tasting copper. Negative. Complete extraction. That's an order. Sir, we don't leave. You leave me. Morrison's voice carried 17 years of command authority, even as his vision tunneled. 73 missions, Chun. Don't let me break that streak by getting you killed. The irony wasn't lost on Morrison as he lay behind collapsed mud wall, watching his team's infrared strobes disappear over the ridgeline. 73 missions without losing a single operator. That perfect record had become his identity, his burden, his pride, and now it would be his epitaph. He'd built SEAL Team 7's reputation mission by mission, refusing to accept the acceptable casualties that other commanders rationalized. His risk assessments were legendary. Some called them obsessive. Before every operation, Morrison ran scenarios until his team could execute them blindfolded. He studied enemy patterns for weeks, memorized terrain elevations down to meter, positioned Overwatch assets with mathematical precision. But tonight, someone had fed the Taliban better intelligence than Morrison possessed. The ambush had materialized like something conjured from hell itself. Morrison's 12-man team had been moving through Kaur Valley on what intelligence designated a low-threat transit route when the first RPG detonated 15 meters from his position. The shockwave had thrown Morrison into a boulder with enough force to crack 2 ribs and drive shrapnel through his Kevlar vest. What followed was textbook Taliban ambush doctrine. Triangulated machine gun fire from elevated positions, RPG volleys timed to suppress rather than kill, and a slow constricting circle designed to capture high-value targets alive. Morrison had made the tactical decision within seconds. His team could fight through the ambush, but only if they moved fast and moved light. Carrying a casualty would reduce their speed by 60% and make them a stationary target for every RPG team in the valley. Chen, execute breakout pattern Delta, Morrison had ordered, his voice steady despite the blood soaking his uniform. Leave me a radio and 2 magazines. Go. Chen had hesitated for exactly 2 seconds, 1 second too long. A burst of Pecan machine gun fire had caught Petty Officer Rodriguez in the shoulder, spinning him like a broken marionette. Now, Lieutenant, they'd gone, because that's what discipline meant. That's what Morrison's 17 years of leadership had trained them to do. Now Morrison was alone, listening to the Taliban fighters reorganizing in the darkness. He counted voices, at least 20, probably more. They knew an American was wounded here. They'd search until dawn, and when they found him, the video would be on Al Jazeera by sunset. Morrison checked his M4, 1 magazine plus the partial in his weapon. Maybe 60 rounds total. He had a tourniquet on his thigh, hemostatic gauze in his medkit, and a morphine injector he was saving for when the pain became incomprehensible. He thought about Sarah, his wife of 14 years, who'd stopped asking him to leave the teams after the 10th deployment. He thought about Emma, his 9-year-old daughter, who'd drawn a picture of him labeled "My Hero Dad" that he kept folded in his helmet. Heroes don't die alone in Afghan valleys, he'd told her once. Apparently, he'd lied. The Taliban voices grew closer. Morrison steadied his rifle, controlled his breathing, and prepared to make them pay for every meter. Then his radio crackled with a transmission that made no tactical sense whatsoever. Reaper, this is Guardian Angel. I'm coming for you. The voice was female, calm, and carried an accent Morrison recognized. Mexican-American, probably Texas. But that wasn't what shocked him. What shocked him was that he recognized call sign. Guardian Angel was Staff Sergeant Alina Vargas, a Marine Corps Scout sniper attached to FOB Chapman. Morrison had met her exactly once, 14 months ago, under circumstances that should have killed her. That mission had been a straightforward village clearing operation in Helmand Province, until it wasn't. Vargas's 4-man recon team had been providing Overwatch when a Taliban counterattack cut them off from friendly forces. By the time Morrison's QRV arrived, 3 Marines where Kia and Vargas was barely conscious having held her position for 6 hours against overwhelming odds. Morrison had carried her to the helicopter personally, her blood soaking into his uniform as she'd whispered through broken teeth, Did I hold? You held, Marine. You held. She'd spent 3 months recovering at Landstill Medical Center. Morrison had visited her once, bringing her the Navy Cross she'd been awarded. They'd talked for maybe 20 minutes. Brief, professional, the kind of interaction you forgot. Except Vargas apparently hadn't forgotten. Guardian Angel, say again your position. Morrison transmitted, his tactical brain fighting to the fog of blood loss. 15 kilometers south-southwest of your location, Vargas replied. I'm moving to you. 15 kilometers. Through Taliban-controlled territory. Alone. At night. It was suicide. Negative, Guardian Angel. Remain at your position. That's a direct order. With respect, sir, you're not my commanding officer. Her voice carried a hint of dark humor. And I don't take orders from men who saved my life. I'm moving. Guardian Angel out. The radio went silent, and Morrison found himself in an absurd situation, bleeding out behind enemy lines, surrounded by Taliban fighters, while a Marine sniper who barely knew him was attempting a solo infiltration that would get her killed. If that opening hooked you, buckle up. This story only gets more intense. Subscribe now for more real stories of courage, and hit that notification bell. Now, let me take you back to show you exactly who Elena Vargas was and why she was willing to die for a man she'd met once. 48 hours earlier, Staff Sergeant Elena Vargas had been cleaning her M40A5 sniper rifle in the armory at FOB Chapman when her commanding officer walked her with news that made her hands stop moving. Vargas, SEAL Team 7 is operating in your old sector. Commander Morrison specifically. Her hands resumed their methodical disassembly of the bolt carrier group. He's a good operator, sir. He saved your life. I'm aware. Captain Williams studied her with the expression of a man trying to solve a tactical problem. Vargas knew that look. She'd been generating that look from commanding officers since Fallujah, when her brother Marcus had been killed by an IED while she watched through her scope from 800 meters away. Marcus Vargas had been 23 years old, a Marine rifleman with exactly 11 days left in his deployment. The IED had been buried in a location Elena had cleared personally 6 hours earlier. The Taliban had replaced it during her shift change. Her brother had died because she'd taken a break. That's how trauma mathematics worked in Elena's mind. Cause and effect. Action and consequence. If she'd stayed on her scope for another 30 minutes, Marcus would be alive. His 3-year-old daughter, Elena's niece Sophia, would have a father. Her mother wouldn't have aged 15 years in a single afternoon. After Marcus died, Elena had requested immediate redeployment. The Corps had sent her to grief counseling instead. She'd attended exactly 2 sessions before lying to psychiatrists with such practiced sincerity that they cleared her for duty. She'd returned to Afghanistan with a singular focus. Never again. Never again would someone die because she stopped watching. Never again would she take a break, except a shift change, trust someone else to maintain overwatch. Her fellow snipers whispered that she was obsessed, that she stayed on her rifle for 16-hour stretches, that she'd logged more scope time than operators with twice her experience. They were right. Obsession was just another word for dedication when you'd watch your brother's body parts scatter across a street in Fallujah. Elena had built her reputation one impossible shot at a time. Her personal record was 1,847 meters, a Taliban commander eliminated during a windstorm that every other sniper on base had deemed unfireable conditions. She'd calculated the crosswind, elevation, and Coriolis effect for 7 minutes, then sent a single .300 Winchester Magnum round through the man's skull while he stood on a mountain ridge. 47 confirmed kills. Every one of them a potential threat eliminated before they could kill an American. Every one of them a small repayment for Marcus. But Elena had never expected to need saving herself. That ambush in Helmand province 14 months ago had been the first time since Marcus's death that Elena had faced her own mortality. Her recon team had been observing a suspected Taliban safe house when 50 fighters materialized from tunnels her intelligence hadn't identified. In the chaos, Elena had been separated from her team, taking shrapnel to her leg and losing her radio. She crawled to a rooftop overlooking the village square, dragging her rifle by its sling, and established a firing position with the detached precision that terror sometimes produces. For 6 hours, Alina had held that rooftop alone. She'd fired 127 rounds, scoring 23 confirmed kills, while blood loss made her scope image swim like something viewed underwater. She'd watched 2 of her Marines die in the street below, close enough to see their faces, too far to help. When she'd finally lost consciousness, her last coherent thought had been an apology to Marcus. "Sorry, brother. I tried." She'd woken in a helicopter to find Commander Jake Morrison applying pressure to her wounds, his face streaked with someone else's blood, his voice impossibly calm. "Stay with me, Marine. You're going home." My team. You held the position. You gave us time to reach them." Morrison's eyes had locked with hers, and in that moment, Alina had seen something she recognized. A man who understood exactly what she'd lost and why. "Rodriguez and Chen are alive because of you. You held." Those words, "you held," had become Alina's mantra during 3 months of rehabilitation. Through 7 surgeries to rebuild her shattered femur, through physical therapy that felt like torture, through nights when the phantom pain of her wounds mixed with the very real pain of survivor's guilt. You held. Now, 48 hours before Morrison's ambush, Captain Williams was watching Alina with an expression that suggested he knew exactly what she was thinking. "Don't even consider it, Vargas." "Consider what, sir?" "Whatever the hell you're planning. Morrison's team doesn't need a guardian angel. They're the best SEAL team in JSOC." Alina reassembled her bolt carrier group with practiced efficiency. "Understood, sir." But she'd already made her decision. 17 years of military service had taught her that sometimes the right thing to do was also the thing that would get you court-martialed. Marcus had taught her something else. Loyalty wasn't a policy. It was a debt that could only be repaid in kind. When Morrison's SEAL team walked into the Carr Valley ambush 28 hours later, Alina was monitoring their tactical frequency from her position at FOB Chapman. She'd been tracking their mission through official channels and several unofficial ones, including a staff sergeant in the TOC who owed her a favor after she'd covered his poker debts. She'd heard the first explosion through her headset, followed by the distinctive chaos of a well-executed ambush, overlapping automatic fire, shouted commands, the hollow thump of RPGs detonating. She'd listened to Morrison make the decision to leave himself behind, heard the pain in Lieutenant Chen's voice as he accepted the order, and she'd heard something else, the specific grid coordinates Morrison transmitted as his team withdrew. Alina had already been packing her gear. "What the hell are you doing?" Corporal Davies had asked, watching her load magazines into her chest rig. "Going for a walk." "At 2,300 hours? In the middle of..." Davies's eyes widened as understanding arrived. "Oh, hell no. Vargas, you can't be serious." Alina had shouldered her rifle and checked her GPS 15 kilometers south-southwest. Maybe 8 hours of movement through hostile terrain if she pushed hard. Dawn would find her 3 clicks from Morrison's position, close enough to provide overwatch, far enough to avoid the Taliban search parties. Till Captain Williams I took unauthorized leave, Alina had said, heading for the armory door. "He'll court-martial you. Only if I survive." She'd slipped through FOB Chapman's perimeter at exactly 2,327 hours, using a drainage culvert that reconnaissance had identified but never officially reported. By 2345, she was 3 kilometers into the valley, moving through terrain that would kill her if she made a single wrong step. The Carr Valley was God's own meat grinder, a 15-kilometer stretch of rocky ridgelines, dry riverbeds, and Taliban-controlled villages strung together like prayer beads. Intelligence designated it permissive only because the Taliban didn't bother with IEDs here. They didn't need them. The valley's natural choke points and elevated positions gave defenders such overwhelming tactical advantage that conventional forces avoided it entirely. Alina avoided nothing. She moved through the darkness with the predatory patience of a hunter who'd spent 7 years learning to be invisible. Every step was calculated. Test the ground's firmness, distribute weight gradually, avoid loose rocks that might clatter. Her night vision goggles cast a landscape in green-white relief, transforming shadows into navigation points. At 0143 hours, she bypassed her first Taliban patrol, 6 fighters moving along a ridgeline with the casual confidence of men who own the terrain. Alina watched them from 70 meters away, prone behind a cluster of boulders, controlling her breathing until they passed. At 0312 hours, she crossed a dry riverbed that intelligence had marked as likely mined. She picked her way across using rocks visible above the waterline, each step a calculated gamble. One pressure plate would scatter her remains across 50 meters. At 0456 hours, as false dawn began painting the eastern sky, she heard a sound that made her blood freeze. Voices ahead, speaking Pashto, moving in her direction. Alina melted into the shadow of a rock overhang, becoming absolutely motionless. This was a skill that separated great snipers from dead ones. The ability to become deranged, to suppress every human instinct that screamed, move, hide, run. The Taliban patrol passed within 20 meters. 12 fighters, heavily armed, moving with a systematic grid pattern of men, conducting a search. They were hunting Morrison, sweeping south from his last known position, and they were moving directly toward FOB Chapman. Alina waited until they were 300 meters past her position before keying her radio, an encrypted frequency she'd programmed specifically for this mission. Reaper, this is Guardian Angel. I'm coming for you. Morrison's response had been predictable. Orders to stand down, tactical arguments about suicide missions, the voice of a commander who'd built 17 years of authority on never losing men. Alina had expected that. What she hadn't expected was a raw exhaustion in his transmission, the way his words slightly slurred together. Morrison was fading. The blood loss, the shock, the shrapnel grinding against internal organs. His body was shutting down. With respect, sir, you're not my commanding officer, she replied, injecting dark humor she didn't feel. And I don't take orders from men who saved my life. I'm moving. Guardian Angel out. She continued north, pushing her pace despite the growing daylight. Dawn was simultaneously her enemy and ally. It would expose her to observation, but it would also allow her to use her optics at maximum effectiveness. At 0647 hours, she reached the ridgeline overlooking Morrison's position. Alina dropped prone behind a cluster of rocks and deployed her M40A5 with the methodical precision of religious ritual. Bipod extended, scope covers removed, dope book consulted for current atmospheric conditions. She ranged the collapsed mud wall where Morrison had taken cover, 647 meters. Through her night forescope, she could see him clearly, too clearly. Morrison was conscious but deteriorating, his movements sluggish as he shifted position. Blood stained the ground around in a pattern that told Alina everything she needed to know. Femoral artery damage, possible internal bleeding, maybe 6 hours before shock killed him. The Taliban had established a loose perimeter around his position, staying just outside rifle range. They weren't in a hurry. They knew the wounded American couldn't run, couldn't call for support without revealing his position. They'd wait for full daylight, then close in with enough force that resistance would be futile. They didn't know a Marine scout sniper was watching through a scope 647 meters away. Alina settled into her shooting position and began the familiar meditation of ballistic mathematics. Range, 647 meters. Wind, 8 kilometers per hour from the southwest. Temperature, 18 degrees Celsius. Barometric pressure, 29.8 inches. Elevation angle, negative 12 degrees. Her mind processed the variables with automatic precision, translating environmental chaos into clean mathematical certainty. Bullet drop for 0.2 mils. Wind hold, 1.1 mils right. Time of flight, approximately 0.9 seconds. At 0703 hours, a Taliban fighter made the fatal mistake of standing fully upright on a ridgeline 680 meters from Alina's position. She exhaled half a breath, found the natural pause between heartbeats, and pressed the trigger. The M40A5 reared against her shoulder with familiar violence. Through her scope, Alina watched the .300 Winchester Magnum round cross 680 meters in less than a second, saw it impact precisely where her calculations had predicted, center mass, between the third and fourth ribs. The fighter dropped like a puppet with cut strings. Morrison's radio crackled immediately. Guardian Angel, was that you? Confirming 1 Tango down, 680 meters northeast of your position. Alina was already scanning for her next target, her voice carrying professional detachment. I have Overwatch, sir. Stay low. For a moment, Morrison's transmission, carried something that might have been laughter or might have been a sob. "You're completely insane, Marine." "Yes, sir." Respectfully insane. Alina acquired a second target, a fighter moving between buildings in a village 710 meters distant. "Two more tangos at your 9 o'clock. Stand by." She fired twice in quick succession. Two fighters fell within 3 seconds of each other, their bodies collapsing in a distinctive way that signaled CNS hits, central nervous system destruction that killed before pain receptors could fire. The Taliban response was immediate and professional. They just lost 3 men to an unseen sniper, which meant their leisurely siege had transformed into an active combat situation. Fighters scattered into cover, abandoning exposed positions, barking commands in Pashto that Alina's limited language skills translated roughly as sniper and find them. But them was the wrong pronoun. There was only Alina, alone on a ridgeline with 8 magazines and the unshakable conviction that Morrison would not die today. She'd made that promise to herself during her 8-hour infiltration. Morrison had carried her broken body to a helicopter when leaving her would have been the tactically sound decision. He'd visited her in the hospital when he had no obligation to do so. He'd looked her in the eyes and told her that her sacrifice mattered, that her brothers had lived because she'd held. Now it was her turn to hold. "Reaper, I'm going to need you to do exactly what I say." Alina transmitted, her eye never leaving her scope. "Can you move?" "Negative. Shrapnel in my abdomen, possible femoral damage. I'm good for maybe 4 more hours." For hours. Alina's tactical brain recalculated timelines with brutal honesty. Morrison's SEAL team was at least 6 hours away, assuming they could organize a rescue operation through the Taliban perimeter. Air support was unavailable. The nearest Apache helicopters were committed to operations in Helmand province, which meant Alina needed to keep Morrison alive for 6 hours minimum, possibly longer, while surrounded by an enemy force that was growing larger by the minute. "Copy that, sir. I'll keep them off you." Guardian Angel out. She settled into her scope and began the patient work of elimination. At 0734 hours, Taliban fighter eliminated at 823 meters, attempting to flank Morrison's position. At 0756 hours, 2 fighters eliminated at 691 and 704 meters, respectively, coordinating an approach from the east. At 0821 hours, Taliban machine gun team eliminated at 1,105 meters, her longest shot of 1 hours. Taliban machine gun team eliminated at 1,105 meters, her longest shot of the morning, requiring 3 minutes of calculation and a single perfect trigger press. Each kill bought Morrison time. Each death made the Taliban more cautious, more convinced they faced substantial force rather than a single Marine with 8 magazines. By 0900 hours, Alina had expended 42 rounds and confirmed 12 kills. The Taliban had stopped advancing entirely, establishing defensive positions while they tried to locate her firing position. That's when Morrison's voice came through her headset, weaker than before. "Guardian Angel, I need you to listen carefully." Alina didn't take her eye from her scope. "I'm listening, sir. If they locate your position, you break contact immediately. That's not a request. That's an order from a dying man who doesn't want his rescue turning into a double funeral." "Noted, sir." Vargas. Morrison's voice carried 17 years of command authority despite the blood loss. "Promise me." Alina thought about Marcus, bleeding out in a Fallujah street, while she watched through a scope. She thought about the promise she'd made at his funeral. Never again would she abandon someone who needed her. "I promise I'll keep you alive, sir. That's the only promise I'm making." Morrison's response might have been a laugh or might have been a cough. "You're the most insubordinate Marine I've ever met." "Thank you, sir. Now shut up and let me work." She returned to her scope, scanning for targets, calculating ranges, making death into mathematics. The sun climbed higher, transforming the Kar Valley into a furnace. Heat shimmers made ranging difficult, forcing Alina to adjust her calculations constantly. Dehydration was becoming a factor. She'd already consumed half her water, and the day's heat was just beginning. At 1,047 hours, the situation deteriorated. Through her scope, Alina watched a convoy of 3 technical trucks arrive from the north. Toyota Hiluxes mounted with DSHK heavy machine guns. Approximately 20 additional fighters dismounted, moving with a tactical discipline that suggested formal military training. These weren't local Taliban militia. These were foreign fighters, possibly Haqqani network operatives, possibly Pakistani ISI advisors. Whatever their origin, they just tripled the enemy force size. And they brought a man who clearly knew how to coordinate a professional assault. The new commander, Alina identified him by the way other fighters deferred to him, began positioning his forces with methodical precision. Machine gun teams on elevated positions, rifle squads in stagger formations, flanking elements moving to cut off retreat routes. He was preparing to overrun Morrison's position through overwhelming firepower. Alina ranged a commander, 1,247 meters. Extreme distance, well beyond her rifle's effective range given current atmospheric conditions. But not impossible. She consulted her dope book, calculated her ballistic solution, and made a decision that would either save Morrison's life or waste ammunition she couldn't afford to lose. Range, 1,247 meters. Wind, 12 kilometers per hour from southwest, gusting. Temperature, 31 degrees Celsius. Elevation angle, negative 18 degrees. Bullet drop, 7.8 mils. Wind hold, 2.3 mils right, with additional hold for crosswind gusts. Alina controlled her breathing, found the space between heartbeats, and sent a single .300 Winchester Magnum round across nearly 1,250 meters of hostile territory. The bullet took 1.4 seconds to reach its target. Through her scope, Alina watched the commander's head snap sideways, his body collapsing like a building with its foundation removed. The effect on the Taliban assault was immediate and devastating. Without their commander, the coordinated attack dissolved into confused shouting and pointing. Fighters abandoned their positions, falling back to cover, searching desperately for the sniper who just eliminated their leader from impossible distance. Morrison's voice came through her headset, carrying something that might have been awe. "Guardian Angel, please tell me you did not just make that shot." Confirming command element eliminated 1,247 meters. Alina was already scanning for her next target, her voice professionally neutral. "They're disorganized. This is our window." "Our window for what?" "For me to come get you." "Negative. Vargas, that's a tactical necessity, sir. You got maybe 3 hours before you bleed out. I'm moving to your position." Guardian Angel out. She'd already begun packing her gear before Morrison could argue further. The shot at the commander had bought them time. Maybe 30 minutes before the Taliban reorganized. 30 minutes for Alina to cover 647 meters of exposed terrain, reach Morrison's position, and establish a defensive perimeter they could hold until SEAL Team 7 arrived. It was tactically insane. It violated every principle of sniper doctrine. It would almost certainly get both of them killed. Alina checked her rifle one final time and began moving down the ridgeline. Because some debts could only be repaid in person, Alina moved to the Khar Valley with the speed of desperation, tempered by the discipline of 7 years as a scout sniper. Every boulder became momentary cover. Every dry riverbed a concealed avenue of approach. She'd covered this kind of distance before. During Marine Corps Scout Sniper School at Quantico, she'd logged hundreds of miles moving through hostile terrain while instructors tracked her with thermal optics. But those had been exercises. This was survival. She crossed the first 200 meters in 11 minutes, using a dry wadi that intelligence had marked as likely IED contaminated. Alina ignored the warning. Right now, pressure plates were statistically less dangerous than Taliban fighters reorganizing their assault. At 1,134 hours, she heard voices ahead, 3 fighters moving parallel to her route, speaking in urgent Pashto. Alina froze behind a cluster of rocks, controlling her breathing to absolute silence. The fighters passed within 40 meters, close enough that she could see the sweat staining their uniforms, the way their hands gripped their ACAMs with white-knuckle tension. They were terrified. Good. She waited 2 minutes after they passed before continuing. The Taliban fear was her best asset right now. They just watched their commander's head explode from a sniper they couldn't locate. That kind of psychological warfare bought time measured in heartbeats and hesitation. By 11:56 hours, Alina had covered 450 meters and reached a position where she could see Morrison directly. He was conscious, barely, his face pale with blood loss. The tourniquet on his leg had slowed the femoral bleeding, but the shrapnel wound in his abdomen was the real problem. Internal injuries that would kill him slowly, painfully, inevitably, unless she reached him in the next 20 minutes. Alina keyed her radio. Reaper, I'm 200 meters south of your position. When I say move, I need you to low crawl to the rock cluster at your 10 o'clock. 15 meters. Can you make that? Morrison's response was delayed, slurred. Maybe. Vargas, this is stupid. Yes, sir. Ready to move on my mark. She sighted through her scope, identifying 3 Taliban fighters who had visual angles on Morrison's crawl route. Range, 380, 410, and 445 meters respectively. All 3 would need to die within a 10-second window, the amount of time Morrison would be exposed. Alina settled her breathing, calculated her adjustments, and became the weapon her brother Marcus had always told her she'd be. Stand by, Mark. Her rifle fired 3 times in quick succession, the shots blending together into a single sustained thunder. Through her scope, she watched. First target down at 0.7 seconds. Center mass hit, probable heart destruction. Second target down at 2.1 seconds. High chest hit, catastrophic lung damage. Third target down at 3.4 seconds. Next shot, not her intended point of aim, but the wind gust had shifted her round 6 inches left. Still fatal. Morrison crawled to 15 meters in 12 seconds. That probably felt like 12 hours, dragging his wounded leg behind him, leaving a blood trail that would be visible from orbit. He collapsed behind a rock cluster as Alina's 4th shot eliminated a Taliban fighter who'd spotted the movement. Range, 520 meters. Another clean kill. Reaper, stay down. I'm coming to you. Alina broke cover and sprinted the final 200 meters, abandoning stealth for speed. The Taliban would see her. That was inevitable now. But seeing her and stopping her were different problems. She covered the distance in 90 seconds, her lungs burning, her rifle held a high ready. Rounds cracked past a position. Wild, panic shots from fighters who'd finally identified her location. She reached Morrison's position and dropped behind the rocks as bullets began impacting with systematic precision. The Taliban were finding their courage again. Up close, Morrison looked worse than she'd expected. His face was corpse pale, lips almost blue with shock. The bandages he'd applied to his abdomen were saturated black with blood, and the femoral tourniquet was barely controlling the bleeding from his thigh. Hey, Marine, Morrison whispered, attempting a smile. You're late. Traffic was terrible, sir. Alina was already assessing his injuries with clinical detachment, her mind categorizing damage the way she'd been trained at Combat Lifesaver School. This is going to hurt. Can't hurt worse than it already does. Alina pulled fresh hemostatic gauze from her medical kit and stripped away Morrison's saturated bandages. The shrapnel wound in his abdomen was worse than she'd hoped, a ragged 4-inch tear that had penetrated his peritoneum. She could see intestinal tissue through the wound, glistening pink-gray in the harsh daylight. She packed the wound with hemostatic gauze using firm, quick movements, ignoring Morrison's bitten-off scream. The gauze would promote clotting, buying him hours instead of minutes. It was battlefield medicine at its most brutal, effective, agonizing, and absolutely necessary. Tourniquet time? She asked, checking the one on his thigh. Morrison glanced at his watch with shaking hands. Applied at 23:47 last night. 8 hours. 8 hours was approaching the danger threshold. Tissues deprived of blood flow for too long would die, creating toxins that could kill even if the bleeding stopped. But releasing the tourniquet now would be fatal. Morrison's femoral artery was compromised. Without that tourniquet, he'd bleed out in minutes. We'll deal with that when extraction arrives, Alina said, applying a second tourniquet above the first for redundancy. How's your pain level? 11 out of 10. Want morphine? Not until I absolutely need it. I'd rather stay conscious. Smart. Morphine would dull the pain, but it would also cloud Morrison's judgment and suppress his respiratory drive. Dangerous when his body was already in shock. Alina pulled her rifle back to her shoulder and scanned their surroundings through her scope. The Taliban had regrouped faster than she'd expected. Maybe 40 fighters visible, probably more concealed. They were establishing firing positions in a loose semicircle, staying out of her effective range while they waited for reinforcements. They'd learned to respect her rifle. That was good. What wasn't good was a technical truck mounting a DSHK heavy machine gun that was repositioning to the northwest. That 12.7 millimeters weapon could punch through a rock cover like it was cardboard. Reaper, I need you to call your team. Alina said, her eye never leaving her scope. We got maybe 4 hours before they overrun us. Lest that they bring up more heavy weapons. Morrison keyed his radio with trembling fingers. Frost 7, this is Reaper. I've got a situation that requires immediate QRF. Lieutenant Chen's voice came back instantly, tight with controlled emotion. Reaper, say status. We've been trying to reach you for 9 hours. I'm alive, barely. Staff Sergeant Vargas from FOB Chapman executed an unauthorized rescue operation. She's currently keeping about 40 Taliban off our position. A pause. Then Chen's voice carried something between admiration and disbelief. Sir, did you say Staff Sergeant Vargas? The Marine sniper? Affirmative. The same one who's about to get court-martialed for saving my life. Understood, sir. We're organizing extraction now. ETA is 5 hours, possibly 6. Can you hold that long? Alina and Morrison's eyes met. 6 hours. Against 40-plus Taliban fighters, with more arriving. With Morrison's injuries deteriorating by the minute. With her ammunition supply finite. And her water already half depleted. Morrison's hand found hers. Squeeze once. We'll hold. Frost 7. We'll hold. Over the next 30 minutes, Alina transformed their position into the deadliest 100 square meters in Afghanistan. She ranged every potential approach route, memorized the elevation of each rock cluster, identified choke points where Taliban fighters would be forced to expose themselves. Morrison, despite his injuries, contributed what he could. He monitored their tactical frequency, reported enemy movements, reloaded Alina's magazines when his hands had enough strength. It was a kind of partnership that emerged in desperate situations. Two warriors working in absolute synchronization because failure meant death. At 1,247 hours, the Taliban tested their defenses with a probing attack. 8 fighters advanced from the east, using fire and movement tactics that suggested professional training. Alina eliminated 3 of them in 4 shots. The remaining 5 broke contact and retreated, leaving their dead where they'd fallen. Guardian Angel, this is Frost 7. Chen's voice crackled through the radio. Be advised, we got a problem. Weather's deteriorating at Bagram. Our helos are grounded until conditions improve. Morrison closed his eyes. How long? Best case, 4 hours delay. Worst case, 12 hours. 12 hours. Morrison would be dead long before then. Hell, Alina might be dead before then. Copy that, Frost 7. Keep us updated. Morrison killed the radio and looked at Alina. You should leave. Take my radio and coordinates. Guide the team and remotely. No, that's not a suggestion, Marine. I'm giving you a direct. You're giving me bullshit, sir. Alina's voice was flat, final. I didn't infiltrate 15 kilometers to hold your hand while you die. We're both getting out of this valley, or neither of us is. Those are the only 2 options. Morrison stared at her for a long moment, seeing something in her eyes that made him nod slowly. Your brother, the one who died in Fallujah. This is about him. It wasn't a question. Marcus was a Marine rifleman. Alina said quietly, her eyes still locked to her scope. His convoy hit an IED in a sector I'd cleared 6 hours earlier. Taliban had replaced the bomb during my shift change. He bled out before medevac arrived. That wasn't your fault. No, it was a result of me stopping, of taking a break when I should have kept watching. Alina's finger tightened on her trigger as a Taliban fighter appeared in her crosshairs. She fired. The fighter dropped. I don't stop anymore, sir. Not when someone needs me. Understanding settled over Morrison's face. Not pity, but recognition. They were the same kind of broken, he and Alina. Both haunted by the people they couldn't save. Both driven by the need to never fail again. 73 missions, Morrison said. That's my count. 73 operations without losing a single operator. You know why that number matters so much to me. Because you're a control freak? A weak laugh. Because Mission 74 was supposed to be my retirement operation. One last job before I went home to Sarah and Emma for good. He coughed, tasted blood. Guess I won't make it. Yes, you will. Alina's voice carried absolute conviction. Because I'm not losing anyone else. Not today. She returned to her scope and began the patient work of keeping them alive, one shot at a time. The sun climbed higher, transforming their rock shelter into an oven. Sweat soaked Alina's uniform, dehydration, making her hands tremble slightly. She compensated by controlling her breathing more carefully, by taking extra seconds to verify her calculations. At 1,334 hours, she eliminated a Taliban machine gun team at 892 meters. At 1,401 hours, she killed 2 fighters attempting to flank from the south, ranges of 645 and 680 meters. At 1,456 hours, she made the shot that would later appear in Marine Corps marksmanship manuals as an example of extreme-range engagement under combat conditions. A Taliban commander, identifiable by his newer uniform and a radio he carried, appeared on a ridgeline 1,847 meters from Alina's position. He was directing his forces, repositioning fighters, coordinating the kind of systematic assault that would overwhelm their position within hours. Alina ranged him carefully, consulted her dope book, and began calculations that required 3 full minutes of mathematics. Range, 1,847 meters. Wind, 14 kilometers per hour from southwest, gusting to 18 kilometers per hour. Temperature, 37 degrees Celsius. Barometric pressure, 29.3 inches. Elevation angle, negative 22 degrees. Coriolis effect, 0.3 mils right correction. Bullet drop, 11.4 mils. Wind hold, 3.2 mils right, with additional hold for wind, gusts, and crosswind components. Time of flight, approximately 2.1 seconds. It was an impossible shot, beyond her rifle's effective range, beyond the conditions that qualified as fireable, beyond the realm of calculation into the realm of prayer. Alina exhaled, found the stillness between heartbeats, and pressed the trigger. The .300 Winchester Magnum round left her barrel at 2,850 feet per second, arcing through atmosphere made unstable by heat and wind. For 2.1 seconds, it fought gravity and air resistance, shedding velocity, dropping according to ballistic laws that Alina had memorized like scripture. Through her scope, Alina watched the round impact precisely where her calculations had predicted. Center mass on the Taliban commander, 1,847 meters away. He collapsed instantly, dead before his brain could process what happened. The effect on the Taliban assault was catastrophic. They just watched their second commander die to an invisible sniper who could apparently kill at will across distances that defy belief. The systematic attack dissolved into chaos as fighters abandoned their positions, falling back to cover that might protect them from the supernatural threat. Morrison had watched the shot through binoculars. His voice carried something between shock and reverence. Vargas, what the hell are you? A Marine who's tired of losing people, sir. She checked her ammunition. For magazines remaining approximately 80 rounds. Against 40-plus Taliban fighters who were terrified but not defeated. The math wasn't in their favor. At 1,534 hours, Morrison's condition deteriorated sharply. The morphine he'd finally accepted was barely controlling his pain, and his skin had taken on the gray color that signaled advancing shock. His breathing was shallow, rapid, the kind of respiratory pattern that preceded complete system collapse. Vargas, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. I need you to promise me something. Save your strength, sir. Listen, when I'm gone, tell Sarah I made it to 74 missions. Tell her I went out protecting my Marines. You're not dying. Yes, I am. Morrison's eyes were clear despite the pain, accepting. But you don't have to. Take my rifle and ammunition. Move back to Overwatch position. Hold until Frost 7 arrives. Alina reloaded her magazine with movements made automatic by repetition. I thought we already had this conversation, sir. I'm ordering you, and I'm refusing. She sighted through her scope, eliminated a Taliban fighter who'd exposed himself at 720 meters. You saved my life in Helmand province. You visited me in the hospital when you had no reason to. You told me I held my position, that my sacrifice mattered. Her voice cracked slightly. Now it's your turn to hold, sir, because if you die, then all this, every shot I made, every Taliban I've killed, every step I took through that valley, it all means nothing. And I can't let it mean nothing. Not after Marcus. Morrison was silent for a long moment. Then his hand found hers again, squeezed with what little strength remained. "You're the bravest Marine I've ever met, Vargas. I'm the most stubborn Marine you've ever met, sir. There's a difference." A weak laugh that turned into a coughing fit. Alina helped him drink from her camelbach, rationing the water they'd need to survive until extraction arrived. If extraction arrived, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western ridgeline, painting the Kar Valley in orange and gold. In 6 hours, darkness would make Alina's long-range shot impossible. The Taliban would use the night to close the distance, and no amount of skill would save them from a close-quarters assault she couldn't see. They needed SEAL Team 7 before nightfall, or they needed a miracle. At 1,623 hours, they got neither. Instead, they got worse news. "Reaper, this is Frost 7. Lieutenant Chen's voice carried the weight of a man delivering a death sentence. Weather hasn't improved. Helos are still grounded. Earliest extraction window is now 2,300 hours, possibly later. 2,300 hours. Another 6.5 hours. Morrison would be dead by then. Hell, Alina might be dead by then. And even if they somehow survived, navigating helicopter extraction through Taliban-controlled territory at night was suicide. Morrison keyed his radio with shaking hands. "Copy that, Frost 7. Keep working the problem." He released the radio and looked at Alina. "You need to leave. Now, before they surround us completely." "No, that's not stubbornness, Marine. That's stupidity. I'm done, but you can still make it out." Alina checked her ammunition. 3 magazines plus the one in her rifle. Maybe 60 rounds total, against an enemy force that had grown to 50-plus fighters as reinforcements arrived from surrounding villages. The tactical math was unambiguous. They were going to die here. She thought about Marcus, bleeding out in Fallujah while she'd been too far away to help. She thought about the promise she'd made at his funeral, the vow that had driven every decision since. "Never again. I'm not leaving, sir. Not now, not ever. You're going home to Sarah and Emma. That's not negotiable." Morrison's eyes filled with tears he was too weak to hide. Why are you doing this?" "Because you carried me to that helicopter in Helmand Province when leaving me would have been easier. Because you visited me in a hospital and told me my sacrifice meant something." Alina's voice was steady, certain. "Because that's what warriors do for each other. We hold, no matter what." She returned to her scope and prepared to hold her position against mathematically impossible odds. Because some promises were worth dying for. And some people were worth saving, even if it cost everything. The Taliban assault began at 1,647 hours with the kind of coordinated precision that made Alina's blood run cold. This wasn't a disorganized charge. This was professional military tactics executed by fighters who finally overcome their fear enough to press the attack. 3 elements moved simultaneously. A fixing force of 12 fighters advancing from the east to draw Alina's fire, a flanking element of 8 moving through a wadi to the south, and a support element establishing a heavy machine gun position to provide suppressive fire. Alina had perhaps 15 seconds to prioritize targets before they overran her position. She chose a machine gun team, which shred their rock cover and kill them both within seconds. Alina ranged the team, 1,120 meters, establishing position on a ridgeline with good firing angles. 3 men, gunner, assistant gunner, ammunition bearer. She exhaled, found her rhythm, and began firing. First shot, gunner down at 1,120 meters. Headshot, instant death. Second shot, assistant gunner scrambling to take over the weapon. Down at 1,123 meters. Chest hit, catastrophic lung damage. Third shot, ammunition bearer trying to retreat. Down at 1,140 meters as he turned to run. Spine hit. He collapsed like a building folding in on itself. 3 Taliban dead in 11 seconds. The machine gun position neutralized, but the fixing force and flanking element were still moving. Alina shifted her aim to the eastern approach, where 12 fighters were advancing using fire and movement tactics. She eliminated the lead man at 680 meters, then shifted to the second man at 695 meters. Both dropped before their companions realized they were under fire. The remaining 10 fighters dug for cover, but they'd already revealed their positions. Alina worked through them with mechanical precision. Third target, 715 meters, behind a boulder. She waited for him to expose himself to return fire. When his head appeared, she put a round through his skull. Fourth target, 650 meters, attempting to low crawl to better cover. She led his movement by 2 feet and fired. The round caught him between the shoulder blades. Fifth target, 730 meters, providing covering fire from behind a rock cluster. She waited for his muzzle flash, calculated his exact position from the light signature, and fired 3 inches left of where she'd seen the flash. The round found him behind his concealment. 5 Taliban eliminated in 40 seconds. The eastern approach was temporarily stalled, but the flanking element in the southern wadi was getting close, maybe 200 meters now, using the terrain to shield themselves from her line of sight. "Reaper, I need you conscious," Alina said, her eye never leaving her scope. "South approach, low ground. They're in the wadi, and I can't get an angle on them." Morrison forced his eyes open, fighting the morphine fog. He pulled his M4 carbine across his chest with trembling hands. "How many?" "8, maybe more. They'll be on us in 3 minutes." Can't hold a rifle steady. You don't need to be steady at 50 meters, sir. Just point it in the right direction." Morrison checked his magazine with the automatic movements of 17 years muscle memory. "If they get that close, we're done anyway." "Probably, but let's make them pay for it." Alina returned to her scope, searching for targets in the southern approach. The wadi's elevation change made direct shots impossible. She needed the Taliban fighters to expose themselves at the wadi's edge. She waited. Patience was a sniper's greatest weapon. At 1,651 hours, the first Taliban fighter appeared at the wadi's lip, 70 meters from their position. Morrison's M4 barked 3 times. The fighter dropped, whether from hits or from diving back into cover. Alina couldn't tell, but the firing position had been compromised. Now, the Taliban knew Morrison was armed and capable of returning fire, which meant they'd approach more carefully, use more suppressive fire, coordinate their assault more precisely. The next wave came from 3 directions simultaneously, the eastern approach resuming their advance, the southern wadi team coordinating their assault, and a new element appearing from the northwest with the light of sunset behind them. Alina made the calculation in microseconds. She couldn't defend against all 3 approaches. They were mathematically overwhelmed. She chose the eastern approach because they were closer, more dangerous, more within her effective range. She fired 4 times in 6 seconds. Target at 640 meters. Down. Target at 680 meters. Down. Target at 655 meters. Down. Target at 720 meters. Partial hit. She'd rushed the shot. The fighter collapsed but was still moving, crawling toward cover while leaving a blood trail. But while she'd been engaging east, the southern element had closed to 40 meters. Morrison fired his remaining ammunition in short, controlled bursts, forcing the Taliban to take cover. But his M4 ran dry after 15 seconds, and his hands were too weak to reload effectively. "I'm out," Morrison said, his voice calm despite the circumstances. "Been nice knowing you, Marine. We're not done yet." Alina slung her M40A5 across her back and pulled Morrison's M4 from his hands. She dropped the empty magazine, reloaded with one of her spares, and turned toward the southern approach. 8 Taliban fighters were advancing through scattered rock cover, 40 meters away and closing. At this range, her marksmanship training from Quantico kicked in, muscle memory that required no thought, only execution. She fired 30 rounds in 12 seconds, walking her aim across the Taliban line like a garden hose. Not precision shooting anymore. This was suppressive fire designed to break their assault through sheer volume. 3 fighters dropped. The others dove for cover. Their advance stalled. Alina used a pause to check their ammunition status. 2 magazines remaining for her M40A5, 1 partial magazine for Morrison's M4. Maybe 40 total rounds between them. Against 50-plus Taliban fighters who'd finally accepted that overwhelming Alina's position would require accepting casualties. "Frost, 7. This is Reaper," Morrison transmitted, his voice barely audible. "If you're listening, tell Sarah I loved her. Tell Emma her dad was brave. And tell Staff Sergeant Vargas's commanding officer that she deserves a Medal of Honor, not a court-martial." Belay that shit, sir. Alina snapped, reloaded her rifle. We're not writing our eulogies yet. Vargas, the math doesn't work. We're done. The math never works. That's why we're Marines. We don't quit just because the numbers say we should. She sighted through her scope, searching for targets in the growing twilight. The sun was touching the western ridgeline now, painting everything in orange and shadow. In 30 minutes, darkness would make long-range shooting impossible. In 30 minutes, the Taliban would overrun their position through simple attrition. Alina's radio crackled suddenly. Guardian Angel, this is Frost 7. We got good news and bad news. Give me the good news, Alina replied, eliminating a Taliban fighter at 720 meters. I could use some. Weather's clearing. We got Hello spinning up now. And the bad news? We're still 6 hours out. And we're picking up radio chatter that suggests the Taliban are bringing in RPG teams. They're going to level your position. Morrison and Alina's eyes met. RPG teams meant rockets designed to destroy armored vehicles. Against their rock cover, those warheads would be devastating. The first volley would kill them both, and there was nothing either of them could do to prevent it. ETA on those RPG teams? Alina asked. Intel says 30 minutes. Maybe less. 30 minutes. Just long enough to appreciate the irony of surviving this long, only to die to weapons they couldn't defend against. Morrison's hand found Alina's shoulder. I want you to know what you did here today. Marcus would be proud. Alina felt tears sting her eyes, the first emotion she'd allowed herself to feel since reaching Morrison's position. He died because I stopped watching, sir. Every decision I've made since then has been about never stopping again. And look where that brought you. Alone in a valley, surrounded by Taliban, about to die alongside a stubborn SEAL who should have accepted his fate 9 hours ago. Morrison's laugh was more cough than humor. Your brother didn't die because you took a break. Vargas. He died because wars are chaos and IEDs don't care about perfection. You could have watched that road for 1,000 hours straight, and the bomb still would have been there. But maybe, there is no maybe. There's only the world as it is, not as we wish it was. Morrison's voice carried the authority of a man who'd spent 17 years leading warriors through impossible situations. Marcus died. You lived. And you spent 4 years trying to balance those scales through sheer willpower. Alina was silent. Her eye locked to her scope, engaging targets on autopilot, while Morrison's words hit harder than any Taliban bullet. You know what I think? Morrison continued. I think Marcus would tell you the same thing I'm telling my Marines every day. You can't save everyone, but the people you do save, they're worth everything. I saved you, Alina whispered, but we're both about to die anyway. No, you gave me 9 more hours than I deserved. 9 hours to say goodbye to my team, to tell my wife I loved her one last time, to know that I didn't die alone in this valley. Morrison squeezed her shoulder. That matters, Marine, even if we don't make it out. Alina wanted to argue, wanted to insist that surviving was the only metric that mattered. But somewhere deep in her combat shock brain, Morrison's words were finding purchase. She'd spent 4 years believing that Marcus's death was her fault, that every mission since then was penance for that single moment of human limitation. But what if Morrison was right? What if she'd been carrying guilt for something that was never hers to carry? The moment of philosophical clarity was interrupted by the distinct whoosh of an RPG launching from the ridgeline 400 meters north. RPG. Alina screamed, pulling Morrison flat as the rocket-propelled grenade streaked toward their position. The warhead impacted 8 meters from their rock shelter, detonating with a concussion that felt like being kicked by God. Shrapnel screamed overhead, pulverizing rock, throwing dust and debris into a cloud that made breathing difficult. Morrison coughed violently, blood speckling his lips. That was closer than comfortable. They're ranging us. Alina's tactical brain was already calculating trajectories. Next one will be dead on. She'd barely finished a sentence when a second RPG launched, this one from a different angle. She tracked its smoke trail through her scope, incoming fast, trajectory perfect, impact point precisely where she and Morrison were sheltering. They had maybe 3 seconds to live. Alina did the only thing possible. She sighted on the RPG smoke trail, calculated its speed and vector, and fired at what a rocket would be in half a second.
The .300 Winchester Magnum round intercepted the RPG warhead 70 meters from their position. The rocket detonated mid-flight in a bloom of orange fire, the explosion far enough away that only the pressure wave reached them. Morrison stared at her with an expression that transcended shock. Did you just shoot down an RPG in flight? Lucky shot, Alina said, though her hands were shaking with adrenaline. Won't work twice. But it bought them time, maybe 5 minutes while the Taliban RPG teams repositioned and recalculated their firing solutions. 5 minutes for Alina to make the decision that would define whether they lived or died. She checked her ammunition. 23 rounds remaining against an enemy force that had grown to 60-plus fighters, with more arriving as word spread of the American sniper trapped in Car Valley. The tactical mathematics were unambiguous. They couldn't win this fight. Even if she killed every Taliban fighter in the valley, eventually exhaustion or ammunition depletion would kill her. But maybe she didn't need to win. Maybe she just needed to survive long enough for SEAL Team 7 to reach them. Reaper, I need you to stay conscious the next few minutes, Alina said, her voice carrying the calm that came from accepting impossible odds. I'm going to do something incredibly stupid, and I need you to provide covering fire while I do it. Morrison checked his M4, found enough strength to reload despite his shaking hands. Define incredibly stupid. I'm going to advance to that rock cluster at our 2 o'clock, about 80 meters north. From there, I'll have better firing angles on the RPG teams. I can suppress them long enough for your team to reach us. That's not stupid, Vargas. That's suicide. You'll be exposed from 3 directions. Yes, sir. But if I stay here, the next RPG kills us both. At least this way, one of us might survive. I forbid it. That's a direct order from a dying SEAL who I love like a brother, but who doesn't get to tell me how to die. Alina's voice was gentle but absolutely final. I came here to save you, sir. Let me finish the job. Before Morrison could argue further, Alina loaded her final magazine into her M40A5, checked her sidearm, and prepared to make an 80-meter sprint through ground that was covered by multiple Taliban firing positions. She took 3 deep breaths, said a prayer to whatever God protected stubborn Marines, and broke cover at a dead sprint. The world exploded into gunfire. Rounds cracked past her head, impacted the ground at her feet, tugged at her uniform like invisible hands trying to pull her down. She ran through the bullet storm with the disconnected surrealism of someone who'd already accepted death and found freedom in that acceptance. Behind her, Morrison's M4 barked steadily, forcing Taliban fighters to take cover instead of tracking her movement. 40 meters, 50 meters, 60 meters. A round caught her left shoulder, spinning her sideways. She stumbled, caught herself, kept running. Another round grazed her thigh, more burn than impact. 70 meters. She dove behind a rock cluster as a burst of automatic fire chewed rock fragments from where she'd been standing 1 second earlier. Alina collapsed behind her new position, gasping for air, her shoulders screaming with pain that she forced herself to ignore. She'd made it, against odds that should have killed her 3 times over. She'd covered 80 meters through hostile fire and survived. The bullet wound in her shoulder was superficial, through muscle, missing bone, and major blood vessels. She'd live. The thigh graze was even less significant, already clotting. But her new position gave her exactly what she'd needed, unobstructed firing lanes on the ridgelines where the Taliban RPG teams were positioning. She sighted through her scope, ranged the first team, 520 meters northeast. 2 men, 1 RPG launcher, preparing to fire. Alina's rifle spoke twice. Both men dropped. Second team, 610 meters northwest. 3 men, 2 launchers. She fired 3 times in 4 seconds. All 3 dropped, not all fatal hits, but effective enough to neutralize the threat. Third team, 490 meters, attempting to relocate after watching their comrades die. Alina eliminated the launcher bearer first, then the ammunition carrier. The third man fled. For the first time since the siege began, the Taliban assault faltered completely. They just watched their RPG teams, their trump card, their solution to the sniper who decimated their ranks, destroyed with surgical precision by a target they couldn't pin down. Alina used a pause to check her ammunition status. 9 rounds remaining.
9 chances to keep Morrison alive until extraction arrived. Guardian Angel, this is Frost 7. Lieutenant Chen's voice carried urgency that made Alina's heart race. We've got Apache gunships inbound to your position. ETA 12 minutes. Can you hold? 12 minutes. Against 60-plus Taliban fighters, with 9 rounds of ammunition and a shoulder wound that was making her hands tremble. Affirmative, Frost 7. Will hold. She had no idea if that was true. But sometimes warriors lied to each other about survival odds because hope was its own kind of weapon. Alina settled behind her scope and prepared to make her final 9 shots count. Because 12 minutes might as well be 12 hours when every second was measured in heartbeats and gunfire. The 12 minutes that followed would later be described in SEAL Team 7's after-action report as the most sustained display of sniper marksmanship under combat conditions in modern American military history. But in the moment, Alina wasn't thinking about history or records. She was thinking about keeping Morrison alive for 720 more seconds. She rationed her remaining 9 rounds with the discipline of someone who understood that every bullet was a promise. You will not die yet. Not while I'm watching. At 1,723 hours, a Taliban fighter exposed himself while repositioning on the eastern ridgeline. Alina fired. Range, 780 meters. The fighter dropped. 8 rounds remaining. At 1,726 hours, a machine gun team attempted to establish position on high ground. Alina waited for the gunner to settle behind his weapon, then fired. Range, 650 meters. The gunner collapsed across his DSHK. 7 rounds remaining. At 1,729 hours, 3 fighters attempted a coordinated rush on Morrison's original position, not realizing he was no longer there. Alina fired 3 times in 5 seconds. All 3 dropped. 4 rounds remaining. The Taliban were learning. They'd accepted that direct assault was suicidal, that exposing themselves meant death, that this sniper, whoever she was, could apparently kill at will across distances that defy belief. They shifted tactics. Instead of attacking, they began setting up for siege. Machine gun positions established in depth. Overlapping fields of fire coordinated. Mortar teams positioning in dead ground where Alina couldn't engage them. They were preparing to wait her out. Eventually, she'd run out of ammunition, or Morrison would die from his wounds. Patience was a weapon that didn't require bullets. But patience required time. And in 8 minutes, Apache gunships would arrive to turn patience into a death sentence. Alina keyed her radio. Reaper status check. Morrison's response was delayed, slurred, cold. Can't feel my legs. Hypothermic shock, probably coupled with worsening internal bleeding. The tourniquets on his leg had been in place for over 12 hours now, well past a window where tissue damage became catastrophic. Even if they survived the next 8 minutes, Morrison would likely lose his leg, but alive with 1 leg was better than dead with 2. Hold on, sir. Apache inbound in 7 minutes. Vargas, if I don't make it, tell Chun he's ready for command. And tell Sarah, Morrison's voice broke. Tell her I died thinking about our wedding day. Best day of my life. You're not dying, sir. I didn't come this far to watch you quit now. Not quitting, just tired. Alina understood tired. She'd been awake for 56 hours straight. 16 hours at FOB Chapman before her unauthorized departure. 8 hours infiltrating to Morrison's position. 32 hours holding this position against impossible odds. Her hands trembled with exhaustion. Her vision occasionally doubled from fatigue. And her shoulder wound throbbed with a pain she'd been suppressing through sheer willpower. But tired was just a state of mind. Marcus had taught her that during their childhood in San Antonio, when they practiced shooting at a range their father built behind their house, pain and exhaustion are just your body's way of asking permission to quit, Marcus had said, grinning with the confidence of a 17-year-old who thought he was immortal. Don't give it permission. Marcus had been wrong about his own immortality, but he'd been right about everything else. Alina checked her watch. 1,732 hours. Apache ETA, 6 minutes. She scanned through her scope, searching for threats, her mind automatically calculating ranges and ballistic solutions despite the exhaustion fog. Movement caught her attention. A group of Taliban fighters repositioning from the southern wadi to the northwest ridge. They were establishing position behind rock cover that would give them clear firing lanes on Morrison's original position. They still hadn't realized Morrison had moved. That mistake would cost them. Alina ranged the lead fighter, 820 meters, just at the edge of her effective range given her current physical condition. She calculated her wind, hold, elevation, and the slight tremor in her hands from exhaustion. This would be a difficult shot even under ideal conditions. Right now, with exhaustion and blood loss affecting her stability, it bordered on impossible. She fired anyway. The round flew true for 815 meters before a wind gust shifted its trajectory 18 inches right. Instead of a center mass hit, the bullet struck the Taliban fighter's shoulder, spinning him but not killing him immediately. 3 rounds remaining. Alina cursed her miss, the first non-fatal shot she'd made in 12 hours. Exhaustion was catching up faster than she'd expected. She forced herself to breathe deeply, to reset her mental state, to find the calm center that had carried her through 7 years of impossible shots. The Taliban fighter she'd wounded was screaming, drawing attention from his comrades. They'd identified her firing position now, were directing suppressive fire toward her rock cluster. Bullets impacted around her position, throwing rock fragments that stung her exposed skin. She pressed herself flat against the ground, waiting for the fire to slacken. Guardian Angel, this is Frost 7. Apache is 3 minutes out. They're requesting your position for fire coordination. Alina transmitted her grid coordinates, then added, "Tell Apache we got 50-plus tangos in a loose perimeter, ranges from 400 to 1,200 meters. Priority targets are the mortar positions in the Northwest Wadi." Copy that. Apache is authorized to engage all hostile forces in your vicinity. Get your head down. Get her head down, as if she'd been doing anything else for the past 13 hours. But the knowledge that Apache gunships were inbound, that soon the AH-64's M230 chain guns would be chewing through Taliban positions with 30mm high explosive rounds, gave Alina a surge of hope that felt almost dangerous. Hope could make you careless. Careless got you killed. She maintained her scan through her scope, searching for immediate threats, while the distant thunder of helicopter rotors grew gradually louder. At 1,734 hours, the Taliban made their final desperate assault. 20 fighters charged simultaneously from 3 directions, having apparently decided that dying quickly to helicopter guns was preferable to dying slowly to Alina's rifle. They moved with the courage of dying slowly to Alina's rifle. They moved with the courage of men who'd accepted death, firing wildly while they ran, screaming prayers and curses in Pashto. Alina had 3 rounds left. She fired 3 times in 6 seconds, each shot deliberate, final. First round, lead fighter at 420 meters. Center mass. He collapsed mid-stride. Second round, fighter at 380 meters, carrying an RPG launcher. Chest hit. He fell forward, the undetonated RPG clattering from his hands. Third round, fighter at 450 meters, the closest threat to Morrison's position. Headshot. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings. Her rifle's bolt locked back on an empty chamber. She was out of ammunition. 17 more Taliban fighters were still charging, 400 meters away and closing. Alina dropped her M40A5 and pulled Morrison's M4 carbine to her shoulder. She'd used most of its ammunition during the earlier engagement, but maybe 5 or 6 rounds remained in the partial magazine. She fired controlled bursts into the charging Taliban. Not aiming for precision now, just volume, suppression, anything to slow their advance for 30 more seconds. The M4 ran dry after 9 rounds. Alina dropped the empty weapon and drew her M9 sidearm, a 9mm Beretta with 15 rounds in the magazine. Effective range, maybe 50 meters under ideal conditions. She had charging Taliban fighters at 300 meters and closing. The math was unambiguous. She'd lost. But the sound of helicopter rotors had become a thunder that drowned out even the gunfire, and Alina found herself laughing. Actual laughter, mixing with exhaustion and relief and the surreal absurdity of surviving this long against these odds. "Reaper, get your head down," she shouted, pressing herself flat against the rocks. The Apache gunships arrived like the wrath of a vengeful god. 2 AH-64 longbow helicopters crested the ridgeline, their 30mm M230 chain guns already spinning. The lead Apache opened fire at 1,200 meters,
well beyond the range where the Taliban could effectively return fire. The chain gun's distinctive BRRD sound filled the valley as 30mm high-explosive rounds began impacting among the charging Taliban fighters at 625 rounds per minute. Each round carried enough explosive force to kill everything within a 5-meter radius. The effect was catastrophic. Taliban fighters disappeared in blooms of dust and fire. Rock cover that had protected them from Alina's rifle disintegrated under Apache fire like it was made of paper. The coordinated assault dissolved into panic as survivors realized they were being engaged by weapons they couldn't fight. The second Apache banked hard left and engaged in mortar positions in the northwest wadi, its Hydra 70 rockets streaking out like lines of fire. Explosions rippled through the wadi in sequence, destroying the mortar tubes and killing their crews before they could even attempt to return fire. Within 90 seconds, the Taliban perimeter had been completely destroyed. 50-plus fighters reduced to scattered casualties and fleeing survivors. The valley floor was carpeted with bodies and burning equipment. Alina watched through her scope, feeling nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, no vengeance. Just empty exhaustion and the knowledge that she and Morrison had survived. Guardian Angel, this is Night Stalker. 6. The Apache pilot's voice was calm, professional. Area is secure. Medevac is inbound. That was some shooting down there, Marine. Thanks for the assist, Night Stalker. I was down to throwing rocks. A laugh. We've got eyes on 2 American personnel in your position, confirming you're both alive. Alina crawled back to Morrison's position. He was barely conscious, his breathing shallow, but his eyes open when she touched his shoulder. We made it, she whispered. We actually made it. Morrison smiled weakly. Told you, you were the bravest Marine I ever met. Stubborn, sir. There's a difference. The UH-60 Blackhawk medevac helicopter landed in a wash of rotorblast and dust 300 meters from their position. 2 PJ pararescuemen sprinted toward them carrying a litter, their movement efficient despite the rough terrain. I've got a SEAL with critical injuries. Alina called as they approached. Shrapnel to abdomen, possible femoral damage, tourniquet for 12-plus hours, advanced shock. We've got him, Sergeant, the senior PJ interrupted, his hands already assessing Morrison's injuries with practice efficiency. You did good. Now let us work. They loaded Morrison onto the litter with movements that were gentle despite their speed. Alina tried to stand, to follow them, to make sure Morrison made it to the helicopter safely. Her legs collapsed beneath her. The junior PJ caught her before she hit the ground. Easy, Marine. When's the last time you ate or drank anything? Alina tried to remember. Yesterday? The day before? Time had become meaningless somewhere around hour 20. Can't remember. Yeah, that's what I figured. Come on, let's get you to the bird. The PJ half-carried, half-supported Alina across the 300 meters to the waiting Blackhawk. Morrison was already strapped to the deck, for lines running into both arms, the flight medic working with controlled urgency. They loaded Alina into the helicopter and strapped her into a seat. Someone wrapped a thermal blanket around her shoulders. Someone else pressed a water bottle into her hands and told her to drink slowly. The Blackhawk lifted off, banking hard way from Car Valley, climbing towards safety and survival. Through the open door, Alina could see the sun setting over the mountains, painting the valley in orange and golden shadow, making the kill zone where she spent 13 hours look almost beautiful. She thought about Marcus, wondered what he'd say if he could see her now. Probably something sarcastic about how she'd always been too stubborn to die when she was opposed to. She smiled at that, then closed her eyes and let exhaustion finally claim her. Staff Sergeant Alina Vargas woke up 6 days later in the surgical ICU at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany. The first thing she saw was Captain Williams sitting beside her bed, reading a thick document that looked suspiciously like an official military investigation report. Am I being court-martialed? Alina asked, her voice hoarse from intubation. Williams looked up, and to Alina's surprise, he was smiling. You're being recommended for the Navy Cross. Actually, highest medal for valor the Department of the Navy can award. You'll probably also get an Article 15 for unauthorized departure from your post, but I suspect I'll get quietly disappeared once the medal ceremony happens. Alina processes information with the sluggish cognition of someone recovering from severe trauma. Morrison, Alive. 7-hour surgery to repair his internal injuries. Lost his left leg below the knee, but alive. He's 3 doors down recovering. Been asking about you every day. Relief hit Alina so hard that tears leaked from her eyes before she could stop them. Morrison was alive. After everything, the infiltration, the 13-hour siege, the impossible shots, the sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. He was actually alive. Can I see him? Doctors say you need another 3 days before you're mobile. William set down his report and studied her with an expression Alina couldn't quite read. What you did out there, Vargas, that wasn't just brave. That was borderline insane. Yes, sir. 15-kilometer solo infiltration through hostile territory. 13 hours holding off 60-plus Taliban fighters. 47 confirmed kills with a sniper rifle, including 3 shots over 1,800 meters. You even shot down an RPG in flight, which I'm pretty sure violates several laws of physics. Lucky shot, sir. Williams laughed. You held that position with 9 bullets left when the Apache arrived. You gave Morrison 36 more hours of life that he absolutely didn't deserve based on his injuries. You executed the kind of rescue operation that usually requires an entire platoon. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to something almost reverent. But what I want to know is, why? Morrison saved your life once, 14 months ago. You didn't owe him a suicide mission. Alina was silent for a long moment, her mind drifting back to Fallujah, to Marcus dying while she'd been too far away to help, to 4 years of carrying guilt that felt like drowning. My brother died because I stopped watching, sir. That's been my truth for 4 years. Every mission since Fallujah has been about never stopping again, never taking a break when someone might need me. And now, Alina paused, searching for words to describe something she'd only begun to understand in Car Valley. Now I think maybe Marcus didn't die because I stopped watching. Maybe he just died because wars are chaos, and IEDs don't care about perfection. And maybe what I owed him wasn't perfect vigilance forever. Maybe what I owed him was learning when to stop punishing myself for being human. Williams nodded slowly. Morrison said something similar. Said you taught him that saving everyone isn't the metric that matters. It's whether the people you save know they matter enough to fight for. Morrison's a smart man. He's also recommending you for transfer to SEAL Team 7 as their designated marksman, which is absolutely insane given that you're a Marine and they're Navy. Alina laughed despite herself. I think I'll respectfully decline, sir. I've had enough of SEAL Team drama for one deployment. Probably wise. Though I suspect you're going to be fighting off transfer requests from every special operations unit in the military. Once you're after action, report gets circulated. William stood, gathering his documents. Get some rest, Vargas. You've earned it. And when you're mobile again, plan on a lot of interviews with people who want to understand how you did what you did. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, your brother would be proud. Not of the shots you made or the enemies you killed. Proud that you learned to forgive yourself enough to live for something other than penance. He left before Alina could respond, which was probably for the best. She didn't have words for the emotion that was filling her chest. Something between grief and relief, between loss and acceptance. Marcus was gone. That would never change. But maybe Alina could stop dying alongside him. 3 days later, Alina finally got permission to visit Morrison's room. She navigated the hospital corridors on crutches, her left shoulder still too damaged for full mobility, her thigh wound healing but tender. Morrison's room was typical military medical, sterile, efficient, decorated only by a few cards and a photograph of his wife and daughter taped to the wall beside his bed. Morrison himself looked simultaneously better and worse than she'd expected. Better because he was conscious, alert, clearly recovering. Worse because the absence of his left leg beneath the hospital blanket was impossible to miss. Vargas, Morrison said, his face breaking into a genuine smile. I was starting to think you'd avoid me out of some misguided sense of guilt. How'd you know I was feeling guilty? Because I know exactly how that brain works. You're thinking that I lost my leg because you weren't good enough, fast enough, skilled enough to prevent it. Alina didn't respond, which was answer enough. Morrison pointed to the chair beside his bed. Sit down before you fall down. You look like you're about to keel over. Alina lowered herself into the chair with the careful movements of someone still healing from catastrophic trauma.
I should have reached you faster. Should have eliminated the RPG team sooner. Should have defied physics and mathematics to achieve perfection? Morrison interrupted. Vargas, I was dead the moment that shrapnel hit my abdomen. Statistically, medically, mathematically dead. You gave me 13 hours. I had absolutely no right to survive. You held off 60 Taliban fighters with a rifle and pure stubbornness. You literally shot down an RPG in flight, which is the kind of thing that gets you featured in textbooks under impossible combat shots. But you lost your leg. Yes, and I'm alive to lose it, which is more than I deserved. Morrison's voice was gentle but firm. My leg is a small price for getting to see my daughter grow up, for getting to kiss my wife one more time, for getting to tell my Marines that I loved them and was proud of every single one of them. He reached out and gripped Alina's hand with surprising strength. You didn't save me despite my injuries. Vargas, you saved me with my injuries. There's a difference. And if you spend the rest of your life feeling guilty about my leg, then you've missed the entire point of what happened in that valley, which was that sometimes the best outcome isn't perfect. Sometimes it's just good enough to matter. Morrison smiled. 73 missions without losing a man. That record was killing me. Vargas, every operation, I carried away to perfection like it was my personal cross to bear. And when I finally failed, when I got wounded and had to be left behind, I thought it meant I'd failed at the only thing that defined me. But you didn't fail. No, I learned that being saved is just as important as saving others. That accepting help isn't weakness. It's trust. And that perfect records matter a hell of a lot less than imperfect survival. Alina felt tears on her cheeks before she realized she was crying. Your brother died, and that's tragic and unfair and wrong. But him dying doesn't mean you failed. Morrison squeezed her hand harder. It means you're human, and humans can't save everyone. We can only try our best and forgive ourselves for the inevitable failures. They sat in silence for a long moment. Two warriors who'd learned the same lesson from opposite perspectives. That survival mattered more than perfection. That the people you saved were worth more than the numbers on your record. That sometimes good enough was actually extraordinary. Chin told me your daughter has been asking about me. Alina said eventually, wiping her eyes. Morrison's face lit up. Emma's been drawing pictures of you. She calls you the angel who saved Daddy. Wants to be a Marine when she grows up, specifically a sniper. I'm a terrible role model. You're the best role model she could have. Someone who understands that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and moving forward anyway. Morrison gestured to the photograph on his wall. Sarah wants to meet you when you're recovered. Wants to thank you personally for bringing me home. I didn't bring you home. I just kept you alive long enough for your team to finish the job. Vargas. Morrison's voice carried command authority, despite the hospital setting. Accept the compliment. Accept that what you did mattered. Accept that you're allowed to be proud of surviving impossible odds instead of guilty about the imperfections. Alina nodded slowly, not quite believing it yet, but willing to try. Okay, sir. I'll work on that. Good. Also, stop calling me sir. I'm retired now, medical discharge. Just Jake from now on. You're not staying in? Can't pass the physical with one leg, and I'm honestly okay with that. 74 missions was a good run. Time to go home, be a husband and father, teach Emma how to throw a baseball and ride a bike. He smiled. Maybe I'll write a book about the experience. How a stubborn Marine taught me that perfect records are overrated. Alina laughed despite herself. That's a terrible title. Yeah, I'll workshop it. A comfortable silence settled between them, the kind that only emerged between warriors who'd faced death together and somehow survived. Finally, Morrison spoke again, his voice quieter. Thank you, Vargas, for coming for me, for refusing to give up, for teaching me that being saved doesn't make you weak. It makes you loved. Alina squeezed his hand one more time, then stood to leave. You're welcome, Jake. Now get some rest. You've got a daughter to get home to, and you've got a Navy Cross ceremony to survive. Fair warning, those things are worse than actual combat. Alina left Morrison's room feeling lighter than she had in 4 years. The guilt about Marcus wasn't gone. She suspected it would never be completely gone, but it had transformed from a crushing weight into something more manageable, more human. Marcus had died. That was true, but Alina had lived, and living meant more than just existing. It meant accepting that she couldn't save everyone, that perfection was impossible, that good enough was sometimes extraordinary. She thought about the 13 hours in Carr Valley, about the 47 shots that had kept Morrison alive, about the moment when she'd sprinted through hostile fire because some debts could only be repaid in person. She'd gone into that valley carrying 4 years of guilt and conviction that stopping meant failing. She'd come out of it understanding that sometimes the most important thing wasn't whether you saved everyone. It was whether the people you did save knew they were worth fighting for. Marcus had been worth fighting for. Morrison had been worth fighting for. And maybe, just maybe, Alina herself was worth saving from the prison of perfection she'd been trapped in. 6 months later, Staff Sergeant Alina Vargas stood at attention in the parade ground at Camp Pendleton, California, while the Secretary of the Navy pinned the Navy Cross to her dress uniform. The citation spoke of extraordinary heroism in combat, sustained valor under impossible conditions, and devotion to her fellow warriors that exemplified the highest traditions of the United States Marine Corps. Her mother was in the audience, crying openly. Her niece Sophia was there too, wearing a miniature Marine uniform that made Alina's heart ache with love and loss. But the person who mattered most wasn't in the audience at all. After the ceremony, after photographs and congratulations and formal reception, Alina drove 3 hours to Arlington National Cemetery. She navigated the grounds until she found Marcus's headstone. Corporal Marcus Vargas, United States Marine Corps, killed in Action Fallujah, Iraq. She knelt in the grass beside the headstone, her Navy Cross still pinned to her uniform, and spoke to her brother for the first time in 4 years without apologizing for being alive. "Hey, Marcus. Sorry it's been a while." She traced the engraving of his name with one finger. "I did something stupid a few months ago. Infiltrated 15 kilometers through hostile territory to save a SEAL who'd saved me once. Held off 60 Taliban fighters for 13 hours. Made some impossible shots that you would call showing off." She smiled through tears. "I think I finally understand what you were trying to teach me all those years ago at Dad's range. It's not about perfect shooting. It's about taking the shot when it matters, accepting that you'll miss sometimes, and forgiving yourself for being human. The wind rustled through the trees. Might have been just wind. Might have been something more. I'm letting go of the guilt now, brother. Not forgetting you, never forgetting you, but letting go of the idea that I could have saved you if I had just been a little more perfect. You died because wars are chaos and IEDs don't care about perfection. I live because I'm too stubborn to die when I'm supposed to." Alina stood, brushed grass from her knees, and rendered a final salute to her brother's grave. "Semper Fi, Marcus. I'll keep fighting for the ones worth saving. I'll keep taking impossible shots. And I'll keep learning to forgive myself for being human instead of being God." She turned and walked back toward her car, carrying the Navy Cross and the knowledge that survival, imperfect, messy, human survival, was its own kind of victory. Behind her, if you believed in such things, Marcus Vargas smiled and whispered to the wind, "That's my sister. Stubborn as hell, but she finally figured it out." And somewhere in California, retired SEAL Commander Jake Morrison was teaching his daughter Emma how to calculate windage and elevation, telling her stories about the bravest Marine he'd ever met, a woman who taught him that being saved wasn't weakness, it was trust. And in conference rooms across the military, tactical analysts were studying the Carr Valley rescue operation, trying to understand how a single Marine had held off 60-plus enemy fighters for 13 hours, debating whether her actions should be taught as doctrine or dismissed as unreplicable individual brilliance. But the people who mattered, the ones who understood what had really happened in that valley, they knew the truth. It wasn't about impossible shots or perfect tactics or extraordinary skills. It was about a woman who'd learned that the only unforgivable failure was giving up on people worth saving. That stubbornness was a virtue when applied to protecting the ones you loved. That good enough was extraordinary when the alternative was accepting defeat. Staff Sergeant Alina Vargas had gone into Carr Valley carrying 4 years of guilt and a conviction that stopping meant failing. She'd come out of it understanding that the only thing worth dying for was making sure the people you loved knew they were worth living for, and that not the medals, not the records, not the impossible shots. That was the real victory. The shot that mattered most wasn't the one at 1,847 meters that eliminated a Taliban commander. It was a lesson she'd carry forward, that warriors are human, Humanity is strength, and the people we love are worth fighting for even when the odds are impossible. Semper Fidelis, always faithful, not to perfection, but to purpose, not to flawless execution, but to stubborn persistence, not to impossible standards, but to the people